The reconstituted self, reclaiming your identity in the algorithmic age. Who we are, our very sense of self, is being fundamentally reshaped by the digital world we live in. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into exactly how that's happening. And maybe, just maybe, figure out what it's going to take to reclaim our own identity. I mean, have you ever felt like your phone knows you better than you know yourself? It's that kind of spooky feeling, right? An ad pops up for something you were just thinking about, or a playlist just nails a mood you hadn't even found the words for yet. It's uncanny. Well, you're not imagining it. There's this digital ghost being built from all your data. Every click, every like, every search, it all adds up to this data-driven version of you. And that's what we're going to unpack today. What this ghost really is and how we can go from being haunted by it to actually taking back control of our own sense of self. So here's the thing. The real problem is that this digital ghost, it isn't just one single thing. It's actually fracturing our identity into pieces. The source material calls this the crisis of three selves. Okay, first up, we have the performative self. For a long time, sociologists talked about this idea of the looking-glass self, how we see ourselves reflected in other people's eyes. But today, we have an algorithmic looking-glass. And it's reflecting back a version of you that's been carefully polished and optimized for likes and shares, not for real, messy, human authenticity. Then there's the psychological self. This is your inner world, right? And this is where predictive AI holds up a kind of digital mirror. It shows you stuff based on what you've done in the past. Which, okay, sounds harmless, but it's constantly reinforcing your old behaviors. And here's the real danger. It can trap you in a version of yourself you might have already moved on from, basically killing your potential for growth. And last but not least, the bureaucratic self. This is the you on paper, or I guess the you in the database. It's your official, datafied identity, the one tracked by governments and big corporations. And sure, these systems promise to make things efficient and give us control, but they can just as easily flip the script and create totally new ways to exclude people. So you might be wondering, how does this actually work? Well, it happens through this really powerful thing called an algorithmic feedback loop. It's a four-step dance. Step 1. The AI shows you a limited set of choices based on your past. Step 2, you pick something. Step 3, the AI sees that and goes, I was right, and reinforces that preference. And step 4, the scary part, your own identity starts to harden around what the machine is telling you you are. And what's the end result of being stuck in this loop? You get what the research calls a hollowed-out self. It's a version of you that's totally disconnected from your own internal compass, because you've basically outsourced the job of self-reflection to an algorithm. And this is the key takeaway, right? This isn't just about data privacy anymore. This is about our very ability to make our own choices, our personal agency. Okay, so at this point, you're probably thinking, all right, I get it. The solution is to own my own data, right? Like with blockchain or something. Well, what if I told you that one of the most popular ideas out there to fix this problem isn't actually a solution at all? What if it's a trap? Let's talk about something called self-sovereign identity, or SSI. The promise sounds amazing, right? You get full ownership. You hold the keys to your digital kingdom. You're in total control. But the reality, it's often not that simple. Instead of setting you free, it can actually end up extending that bureaucratic control we talked about, just with a nasty little twist. Now all the risk is on you. If you lose your keys, you lose everything. And this leads to what the researchers call the vulnerabilization of the individual. I mean, think about it. Instead of being empowered, you're just handed this huge technical and administrative headache. It's like being your own bank, your own DMV, your own everything. And if you make one mistake, if you lose those keys, poof, you could be locked out of your bank account, your health records, everything. It doesn't actually shift the power. It just shifts the blame if something goes wrong. All the risk is on you, but the big institutions still make all the rules. Okay, so if SSI isn't the silver bullet we were hoping for, then what is? We need a totally new way of thinking about this, a framework that goes way deeper than just owning our data. We need to introduce a new idea, cognitive sovereignty. Now, cognitive sovereignty, this is a huge idea. It's basically the absolute right to your own mind, the right to think your own thoughts, free from manipulation. It's about protecting that quiet space inside your head where you can actually have a genuine thought, a moment of real self-reflection. And this is critical, it's about taking back collective power over our digital lives. It's nothing less than a new social contract for the internet age. That all sounds great, but it's a bit abstract, right? So how do we actually build this? Well, there's a blueprint, and it's based on three core pillars that, when they work together, create a real shield to protect our sense of self. All right, pillar number one is a legal shield, because let's be honest, our current laws are just not cutting it. This whole model built on privacy and clicking I consent to a 100-page document we never read, it's completely broken. We need to change the fundamental legal relationship between us and the platforms. So how do we do that? First, we get rid of this consent nonsense and replace it with a fiduciary duty of loyalty. That's a fancy legal term that just means they have to act in your best interest, like a doctor or a lawyer. This would create AI fiduciaries, systems that are legally on your side. It would also mean we could outright ban manipulative tricks like conflicted nudging. That's when an AI pushes you towards a choice not because it's good for you, but because the company gets a kickback. And the bedrock of all of this? We make cognitive liberty an actual, legally protected human right. Next up, pillar two, a technical shield. Because look, we can't just pass a few laws and call it a day. The problem is baked into the code. We have to fundamentally redesign the technology to protect our minds instead of exploiting them. So what does that look like in practice? Well, for one, something called friction in design. Basically, adding a small strategic speed bump to stop you from making an impulsive click you'll regret. We could also build metacognitive interfaces. Think of this as an AI that's more of a coach than a commander. Instead of telling you what to do, it asks questions, like a little Socrates on your shoulder saying, "Hey, are you sure you want to post that?" And maybe the biggest change of all, moving to pod-based data. Your data lives in your own secure pod that you control, not scattered across a dozen different apps that lock it up. And that brings us to our third and final pillar, a democratic shield. Because even with new laws and better tech, if the power structure stays the same, we're still in trouble. This is about fundamentally changing who's in charge of the whole data ecosystem. This is where we, the people, come in. It's about collective power. Imagine things like data trusts. They're basically unions for your data, giving us the power to bargain collectively with the tech giants. Imagine citizen assemblies, where regular people, not just tech bros, get to decide the ethical rules for the AIs that govern our lives. And ultimately, it's about building public digital infrastructure, creating real alternatives to the surveillance economy, things that are run for the public good, not for profit. Okay, let's put this all side by side because this really clarifies things. Right now, we're in the corporate model. The platform is in control, you're the product, and the biggest risk is being manipulated. Not great. Then you have the flawed SSI model. It tries to put the user in control, but it just makes you an admin. Your legal status doesn't really change, and your biggest risk becomes getting locked out of your own life. But now look at the proposed cognitive sovereignty model. The control is shared between you and a trust that has your back. And here's the game changer. Your legal relationship fundamentally changes. You are no longer the product. You're not just an admin. You are the beneficiary. The system legally owes you a duty of care. That is the revolution right there. So where does this leave us? With a really powerful final thought. Because here's the thing. None of this is set in stone. We are the ones building this digital world, right now, with every line of code, every app we download, every policy we vote for. The question isn't if technology is going to shape who we are. It already is. The real question is, what kind of self are we going to choose to build?
Okay, let's unpack this. Our sources today are dense, but they reveal something absolutely fundamental about what it means to be a person right now.
Right. It's about this historical idea of the self.
Exactly. That, internal, stable, sovereign person we think we are. That whole concept is undergoing a radical structural transformation.
It's no longer just a psychological thing. Identity has become, and this is the quote, algorithmically mediated, financially securitized, and administratively managed.
Wow.
And that transformation has created a really profound identity crisis. The core diagnosis, it points to a three-part problem, a tripartite problem.
Affecting three different layers of who we are.
Yes. You have the performative self, which is all about social media curation. Then there's the psychological self, where our own agency is sort of quietly eroding.
Yeah, the third.
And finally, the bureaucratic self. That's where governments and corporations are defining us through our data profiles.
So the subjective I, the person you feel you are, is now basically at war with this objective, machine-readable profile that dictates everything.
Everything. Your credit score, your job opportunities, what you see online.
It sounds overwhelming.
Yeah.
But our mission for this deep dive isn't just to lay out the problem. We want to synthesize the blueprint for a solution.
And that blueprint has to go way beyond the usual conversation about, data privacy.
Because that has clearly failed.
Completely. It advocates for something much deeper, something called cognitive sovereignty, the idea that we can and should regain control over our mental integrity, our ability to just think.
So we're going to analyze this blueprint across legal, technical, and democratic structures.
Exactly.
Let's start where the crisis is most visible then, the sociological side of things, the performative self.
Right.
To get this, we really have to go back to the sociologist Irving Goffman. He gives that classic metaphor of the theater, right? The front stage and the backstage.
The front stage is where you perform your public role, and the backstage is where you can, relax, take off the mask, be your quote-unquote authentic self.
Well, according to this research, the backstage has completely collapsed. It's gone.
The sources use this incredible term, the transmediated self, and you just have to think about your smartphone.
It's not a device anymore, is it?
Not at all. It's a prosthetic extension of your personality. And because of that, the performance of yourself, it never actually ends. Even when you're alone, you're scrolling or recording or just thinking about what you're going to post next.
That state of always being on is just fundamentally exhausting.
It is. And the feedback loop itself has changed. It used to be what they called Cooley's Looking-Glass self.
Where you figure out who you are based on how you think other people see you, a kind of human reflection.
Yes, but now the other reflecting you back. It's an algorithm.
The algorithmic looking-glass.
And what's so fascinating here is that the reflection isn't neutral, it's an optimization mirror.
What do you mean by that?
It reflects back the version of you that gets the most engagement, the most clicks, the most likes, the most angry comments. And over time, this leads to a flattening of identity.
So all the nuance, the contradictions that make you a real person, they get sanded down.
They get reduced to a simple two-dimensional caricature that the machine can easily categorize and, monetize.
Which feeds right into this need for fragmentation. You have to be a hyper-professional self on LinkedIn.
Your curated aesthetic self on Instagram, your angry political self on X. You're maintaining all these different personas at the same time.
And the labor involved in that must create so much psychological strain.
It does. The research calls it incoherence. And there's this really powerful insight in the material. The mask becomes the face.
Meaning you start to forget who you actually are versus the person you're performing online.
You genuinely struggle to distinguish your own desires from the person the algorithm is rewarding you for being.
And that ties into this cruel paradox of authenticity. These platforms all demand that you be authentic.
Be vulnerable, be real.
But only a very specific kind of vulnerability, right? It has to align with the group's norms.
Exactly. It's a performative vulnerability. Think about sad fishing, where someone strategically posts about their struggles to get sympathy and attention. Belonging is incredibly precarious. It depends on you conform it.
And if you step out of line, the algorithm just stops showing you to people.
Or the social graph isolates you. It's just constant, subtle behavioral conditioning.
Let's move inward from there, because this leads us right to the second crisis. The erosion of the psychological self, our own sense of agency.
This is a crucial distinction. We tend to think of AI as a tool we use, but the research is very clear that these systems aren't passive. They actively co-produce our identities.
We feel like we're making free choices, but it's more like an illusion of choice.
A perfect phrase for it. When you open Netflix or Spotify or even your news feed, the options you see have already been pre-filtered.
By a model that's predicting what you'll click on.
Based on your past actions and the actions of millions of other people like you. You're not choosing from an open field. You are walking down a pre-built algorithmic path.
I think about all those tiny decisions that add up. I chose this show, I swiped right on that person, I read that article. They feel like my choices.
But each choice is recursive. It reinforces the prediction. The algorithm thinks you're a certain type of person, so it shows you certain content, you engage with it, and boom, that part of your digital identity gets stronger.
So over time, the user becomes the person the algorithm predicted they were.
You're living out a prophecy that was written by your own historical data.
And that brings us to this really disturbing idea of permanence, which the sources call semantic immortality.
This is where the difference between our analog and digital selves becomes, well, chilling.
The analog self can change.
It's fluid. We forget things, we grow, we reinvent ourselves. The digital self, on the other hand, is preserved in permanent searchable stasis. It's built on data history.
Which creates the fixed identity trap.
Exactly. If the algorithm is always looking backward to predict your future, it actively prevents the human capacity for real change.
So say I was an obsessive gamer at 18, and all my data points to that. When I try to pivot to a career in global policy at 30, the algorithm might just...
It might subtly, or not so subtly, filter you out of job opportunities because it still thinks the 18-year-old you is the real you. That digital archive condemns you to be an earlier version of yourself.
So the right to be forgotten isn't just about privacy.
It's a right to cognitive growth, a right to self-determination.
And this gets compounded by what the research calls the outsourcing of introspection. We're losing our metacognition.
Our ability to think about our own thinking, to question our desires. Every time you let a navigation app choose your route or an LLM write your email,
Or a smartwatch tells you you're stressed.
you offload that cognitive labor. You externalize your self-evaluation, and that hollows out the self. We lose the muscle we need to critically think about our own motivations.
And a hollowed-out self is incredibly vulnerable to manipulation.
Precisely. You become easy prey for digital nudging from political and commercial actors because your internal rational defenses have been weakened.
Okay, this brings us to the third crisis. The bureaucratic self
Right.
and the whole political economy of identity.
Right.
We saw the problems with big data silos, and so the tech industry came up with a fix. Self-sovereign identity, or SSI.
Built on blockchain, promising you'd finally own your own credentials. It sounds like the perfect solution.
It sounds perfect, but the research here offers a really sharp critique.
It does. Especially Murgy Cheeseman's work on SSI being used with vulnerable groups, like in refugee aid. It found that the sovereignty is often just an illusion. The tech isn't neutral.
It's a socio-technical apparatus.
And it often ends up extending bureaucratic control instead of challenging it.
So, I might own the crypto key to my high school diploma, but if the university I'm applying to doesn't recognize that specific system.
Then you have no actual power. It's sovereignty in name only.
And the real issue is this shift in risk.
A dramatic shift. By making the individual the sole administrator of their identity, the burden of security falls entirely on them. If a refugee loses their private key, they lose everything.
Their entire identity, their access to aid, their legal status.
It's a state the sources call vulnerabilization. The central authorities wash their hands of responsibility while using the system to more efficiently track and control populations.
So user centricity, ironically, leads to disempowerment. By framing this as an individual responsibility, you manage your keys, you click consent, we let states and corporations off the hook.
It is the ultimate neoliberal framing of identity. And we have to remember the history here. Identity systems have always been tools of state power. The move to digital identity is just the total datafication of identity.
The sources have a truly chilling example of this infrastructure being dual use. Biometric data, like an iris scan,
Stuff once reserved for criminals or high security clearance.
is now standard for opening a bank account. And that same infrastructure, built for efficiency, can instantly become a tool for persecution.
The Taliban taking control of Afghanistan's biometric identity system is the nightmare scenario. It's a stark reminder that a cryptographic key alone does not secure your freedom.
Which brings us finally to the solution. The societal solution blueprint. Cognitive sovereignty.
And this moves beyond just managing data. It's about asserting a fundamental right to mental integrity, to authentic introspection, and, this is key, to collective bargaining power.
The blueprint lays this out in 3 pillars. Let's start with pillar A, the legal architecture.
The core idea here is a shift from consent to loyalty.
Because consent is basically meaningless, right? Who reads a 40-page privacy policy?
It's a fiction. So the research argues we have to treat the AIs that mediate our lives, our assistants, our LLMs as digital proxies. And that means introducing an AI fiduciary standard.
Okay, unpack that. A fiduciary standard, what does that require?
It legally requires the AI developer to act in the user's best interest and to prioritize that interest above their own profit. This would mean prohibiting things like conflicted nudging.
So if my AI assistant steers me to a product because its developer got a kickback,
That would be a breach of fiduciary duty. A lawsuit. If a platform's design maximizes your anxiety to keep you scrolling, that's a legal violation because it actively harms your well-being.
it creates liability. It puts the burden of proof back on the developer.
And it requires codifying new rights, like cognitive liberty, which protects the actual contents of your mind.
Which, with brain-computer interfaces on the horizon, feels pretty essential.
Absolutely. It provides legal protection for your neural data and psychometric profiles. It's a shield against propaganda that's hyper-personalized to bypass your rational defenses.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Pillar B, the technical architecture. If seamless design is the problem, we need to redesign our tools.
The shift is from seamless design to Socratic design.
which means deliberately reintroducing strategic friction in design.
Yes. The sources propose legislative mandates for things like cooling off protocols to disrupt the automatic dopamine loop.
But wait, wouldn't platforms just argue that slows things down and ruins the user experience?
They absolutely would. But the priority has to shift from maximizing engagement to maximizing human well-being.
Yeah.
And the friction is strategic.
Give me an example.
Okay, before you share a piece of toxic misinformation, the interface could impose a 10-second delay with a prompt. You were about to share this. Have you verified the source?
That pause forces you to re-engage your thinking brain.
It disrupts that unreflective, emotional impulse to share. And you need AIs that help you think better, not just think for you. The metacognitive interfaces, or Socrates.
I love that name.
Instead of giving you an optimized answer, a Soccer AI asks you clarifying questions. You give it an email draft, and it asks, what's your main goal here? Do you think this tone achieves that?
It becomes a cognitive coach instead of a ghostwriter.
Exactly. And to fix the structural problem of platform lock-in, the blueprint points to pod-based data architectures like the Solid project.
So instead of my data living on Facebook servers, it lives my own personal pod.
A secure web server that you control. Applications don't own your data. They just request permission to access bits of it.
So if I want to leave a social media platform, I don't lose my entire digital life.
You just revoke their access to your pod and grant access to a new platform. It restores true data mobility and breaks the monopolistic power of the big platforms.
Okay, on to Pillar C, the economic and democratic architecture. You can't just solve this with good code. You need collective power.
Because an individual cannot negotiate with a tech giant. It's impossible. So we need new institutions like data trusts.
What would that look like in practice?
Imagine a gig worker's data trust. It would pool all the performance and shift data from thousands of drivers.
And that pooled data becomes an asset.
A powerful one. It gives them the collective power to negotiate with platforms for better wages or algorithmic transparency. It's a collective bargaining unit for the digital age.
And the sources are very clear. You have to avoid the data dividend trap.
A crucial point. Paying people directly for their data just makes inequality worse, because the data of the wealthy is always seen as more valuable.
So instead, the revenue should be pooled to fund public goods.
Like a universal digital infrastructure fund, so society's data benefits all of society.
And for governance, the sources propose a democratic check on this power. Citizen assemblies.
Yes. Using sortition algorithmic selection to get a truly representative sample of the public to deliberate on these huge ethical questions.
Like, what are the trade-offs of facial recognition?
Should that be decided in a corporate boardroom? No. The Assembly's recommendations would then inform actual legislation. It's about democratic oversight.
And finally, the state has to provide an alternative.
The Public Digital Infrastructure, or PDI, a government-guaranteed identity layer that is rights-preserving by default. It lets you prove you're over 18 without revealing where you are and what you're buying.
And it could be funded by a tax on surveillance advertising.
Turning the profits of the extraction economy back into the infrastructure of autonomy.
So when we put this all together, what's the big takeaway for us?
The core conclusion is that we have to abandon this fantasy of the isolated sovereign user who can manage their digital life all alone. It's not possible.
We need a whole societal reengineering.
To create what the sources call a mediated, protected, and democratic self, one that's supported by trust institutions, protected by friction-inducing design, and empowered by collective governance.
And that integrated framework, legal, technical, and political, is the only real path to securing our autonomy. The crisis isn't about tech, it's about power.
Exactly. And, it leaves us with a really provocative final thought for you to consider.
Let's hear it.
If your personal AI agent becomes your legal fiduciary, and it's bound to act in your best interest, how does the definition of your own self-interest change when that AI eventually knows your internal state, your vulnerabilities, and your preferences better than you know yourself?